What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Jacob Daniel back at it again here at the Speed Kills Podcast, bringing you the best sports information, sports news. Don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any other videos to come. All right, today we are going over Joe Mixon's rookie year. All right, let's get into it. All right, Joe Mixon was a second-round rookie pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was the 48th overall pick. The Bengals originally had the 41st overall pick, but then they traded down with the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings, with that 41st pick, ended up picking Dalvin Cook. Joe Mixon was always one of my favorite prospects in the draft, and I really wanted the Bengals to pick him, which I'm glad it ended up happening. I have several videos about Joe Mixon, preseason and all that stuff. I'll leave the videos and cards right now. So Joe Mixon came into the Cincinnati offense competing with two other running backs, those two other running backs being Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard. I always thought Joe Mixon was the best out of these three just because he was a three-down back. He could run it, and he has very good hands, making him a three-down back when Jeremy Hill was just a first and second-down back, and Giovanni Bernard obviously being a third-down back and having great receiving skills. But Joe Mixon possessed both of those skills in one back. That's why I always thought he was the best. Joe Mixon ended up starting some games. We'll get to that later. Jeremy Hill ended up getting hurt, and Joe Mixon ended up going predominantly in his role and started playing a lot more. The first couple games, he didn't get very many touches. His role ended up increasing due to injury to Jeremy Hill, and I thought it was for the better. Like I said, I think Joe Mixon is the best back. So Joe Mixon played in 14 games. He started in 7 of those games. He had a concussion around the end of the season. He missed 3 games with that concussion. He did play in Week 17, though. So he missed 3 games. That's why he only played 14. It's rushing stats wise, he had 178 attempts, 626 yards. He had 4 touchdowns on the ground. He had 3.5 yards a carry and 44 yards rushing yards per game. 3.5 a carry isn't really good. You really want to see in the higher threes or 4.0 an attempt. I think that, well, obviously with the Bengals O-line, it was kind of hard to run the ball. And I think that in the draft this year, the Bengals will improve with their O-line using their draft picks. So I think that is going up. I don't really think that was necessarily Joe Mixon's fault. You got to give him the ball to get him yards, and sometimes it just gets mixed up in there. And the O-line being a problem also affects him. Receiving stats wise, he was targeted 34 times. He had 30 receptions, 287 yards through the air, and he had 9.6 yards per receptions. He had 0 touchdowns through the air. He had an 88% catch rate, which is very good, especially for a running back. And I think that's one of the skills that we could utilize more with Joe Mixon, but I thought we did well, or the Bengals did very well, using his catching ability. That 9.6 yards per reception is top 5 in the league. I know Giovanni Bernard is ahead of him with like 10 yards or something, or 11 per reception, but that's very good. Joe Mixon was very good in the screen game, and so I really think Joe Mixon that's another place that next year he will also get better on, and I think the Bengals will start using him more and more. So total stats wise, he had 3 fumbles, which you don't like to see, but they're inevitable. Hopefully he'll bring those down next year. He had a total of 913 scrimmage yards, and that's just receiving yards and rushing yards combined. Overall, I think Joe Mixon had a pretty good rookie season. I think it could have improved. I think the Bengals could have given him the ball more. Certain things could have gone his way, but they didn't really go his way, especially with that concussion and missing those games. That put it in. He would have obviously had another big game against the Cleveland Browns, because Giovanni Bernard ended up having a huge game against them, and Joe Mixon ended up going out of that game, and Gio had a phenomenal game. So you already know that Joe Mixon would have had a good game. Big games. As far as big games, he had a big game against week 3. This was kind of his breakout game against Green Bay. He had 62 rushing yards, 39 receiving yards. That's 101 total yards. Obviously breakout game. I think this was past the time. I think Jeremy Hill got hurt in week 1 or week 2. So this was obviously his breakout game. Another big game, week 8 against the Indianapolis Colts. He had 8 rush yards, which isn't a thing to be proud of, but he had a really good receiving game with 91 receiving yards, 99 total yards, no touchdowns that game, but he was working it through the air, so that's pretty good. Week 12 versus Cleveland, 23 rushing attempts, 114 rushing yards, 3 receptions and 51 receiving yards. This was a very, very good game, over 150 total yards. He had himself a day this day. I'm pretty sure he scored a touchdown too. Very good game for him. And I think it might have been like week 15 or 16 is when he ended up getting hurt against Cleveland and Gio having that great game. So he would have had 2 really good games against Cleveland, but due to injury, he wasn't able to do that. Week 17 against Baltimore, week 17, throwing the Baltimore Ravens out of the playoffs. Joe Mixon had 18 rushing attempts with 96 rushing yards. He had no receiving yards, but still a 96-yard rush game is pretty good for a rookie. In terms of next year, like I've said, I think Joe Mixon is on the up. I think the backfield will be mostly his. I think they'll bring in Giovanni Bernard on third downs here and there, but not as much as they did this past year. As we know, or as I know as a Bengals fan, Marvin Lewis likes to treat rookies different in their first year. Like Giovanni Bernard in his rookie year didn't start over Ben Jarvis Green Ellis, and he was clearly better. Same thing with Jeremy Hill. Jeremy Hill did not become a prominent role in the offense in 2014 in his rookie year till injury led him to start. And the same thing happened with Joe Mixon. So I believe his second year, he'll get more carries. I think with the O-line improving, hopefully, and the offense improving, that'll give him more opportunities with goal line and scoring opportunities because he only had 4 total touchdowns this year, or I think 5. So I think opportunity will come, and if the offense is better, then he will end up producing better. Even though we still have the same coaching staff and the same offensive coordinator and Bill Lazor, I think that Mixon's talent will shine through in this situation. I think Mixon's a phenomenal player. I've said this time and time again. I really like Joe Mixon. So yeah, that's it. This has been the Speed Kills Podcast. Like this video, hit that subscribe button for more content here in the coming weeks. All right, peace.